At the age of 14, Joe began his own recovery, and he realized his dream was to become a counselor in order to help other young people achieve their goals of a happy, healthy, free life of drugs and debilitating addictions and self-destructive behaviors. Joe currently works as a primary counselor for the Cornerstone Recovery Community of Houston. It's called Cornerstone of Houston Team Counseling Program. Joe's work is more than a job. He says it's a calling and his passion. And he has witnessed the success of Cornerstone's positive peer group method firsthand and says its value cannot be overstated. Positive peer support is what youth live and breathe by, and a daily example set by peers speaks the loudest. And with the parent group as the backbone of the program, he feels his role is to lead by an example and illuminate the path. Joe leads a weekly interactive group therapy session for families and facilitates open, honest, and direct communications on all topics of self-destructive behaviors with the Every Brain Matters community. We are so grateful for that. That's every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Central Time. He also provides individual counseling for both teens and parents, and as well as family counseling in order to deal with all of the issues that may either be leading or stemming from substance abuse issues. Joe believes that one of the biggest keys to success long-term recovery lies in the relationship with a higher power expressed through the connection of others. He still follows the same basic principles today with 20 plus years of recovery as he did 30 days sober. God, sponsor, steps, meetings, and service. So thank you for being with us tonight, Joe, and the floor is yours.
For sure. Thank you for that introduction, Aubrey. Hey, everybody, I'm Joe. I think I know most of you guys. Those of you I don't know, it's great to see you, to meet you. I'm happy to be here with you tonight. I'm really here tonight as like a fellow traveler in recovery more than a professional or a counselor, although those are other hats that I wear. And my hope is just that I can be helpful to some way, that my story, my experience can be a beacon for people that are that need a little bit of hope or inspiration, or meet them where they're at. Aubrey, how much time do I have exactly? Brevity is not a strong suit for me.
You have a normal time, like okay, 30, 40 minutes. Meeting. Yeah, and then we'll do a Q&A at the end.
Great. All right. Well, then I'll start at the beginning. I was born on February 9th, 1983 on Air Force Base in North Carolina. My father was in the Air Force. I come from a long line of military men, especially on my father's side, but also a little bit on my mother's side. But also I come from a long line of men that were addicts, alcoholics, physically, mentally abusive to their wives and children. And my father was not an exception from that rule. I've got an older brother and a younger sister, and my older brother and I, we have the same father but a different mom. So he's really my half brother, but we're tight, like we're real brothers. And my sister and I, we have the same mother and father. And one of the things that was pretty apparent to me as far back as I can remember, and a lot of there are like parts of my story that are kind of a blur, and a lot of my childhood kind of falls under that. So you guys have to bear with me a little bit. But I remember as a child, like some of my very first memories are ones of not being safe. My father was, he was just like in a lot of ways, he had his own demons and his own stuff going on, but it just kind of is what it is. He was really physically, mentally, and emotionally abusive as well, mainly to myself and my mom. My older brother never really lived with us when we were when we were growing up. He was almost always, he's about 5.5 years older, and he was almost always with his mom. So I didn't really see much of him. So it was usually my mom, myself, my father, and my little sister. And and my father had my brother when he was 16. So, he things from a real early age for him were not like easy, and the odds were kind of stacked against him. And, that was really uncommon back then. And so, but for whatever reason, and I don't have really an explanation for this, but for whatever reason, my father just kind of had this plan for his life that he wanted a son and a daughter, and that was it. He didn't want any other children. He didn't have any room in his heart for any other children. So the worst part of the abuse that I suffered from my father growing up was really the emotional and mental abuse. Like, all of the physical scars have long healed that from any of the physical abuse, but the mental, emotional abuse, and hearing from my father growing up that he didn't love me, that he never wanted me, that I was unworthy of love, that he was my father and he didn't love me or want me, so nobody ever would, just like things kind of in that same vein. And you hear something like that once or twice, or maybe even 3 times, and you kind of brush it off. It's like, whatever, it's not a big deal. But you hear it over and over and over again for years, and it really starts to like sink in beneath the skin. And for me, it really did. There were a few constants in my childhood, and one of them was that, like, we moved around a lot. We moved, like, I'm 38 now, and I've moved like 60 plus times in my life. So we moved around a lot. And so I learned at an early age not to let anybody get close, and to keep everybody at an arm's distance, because it was just too painful when we left. And inevitably we were going to leave, because that's just what we did. Rather it was, and we would move around a lot for a number of different reasons. Rather, my father would get stationed somewhere else from time to time, or, there were times when my mom would like pack us up and we would like leave or take off in the middle of the night. And my father would come, and either come and find us and would like show up with, presents for my sister and I, and roses for my mom, and a bunch of promises, and, kind of same old story. And we'd go, but nothing would ever really change. We'd go back into the same situation, or my mom would go back on her own, because my mom is in the most incredible, strongest woman that I've ever known, for sure. But other than being in recovery for alcoholism and drug addiction, I'm also like a classically trained codependent, and I like poster board codependent, and I got a lot of that from my mom. So the first like 8-ish or so, maybe 9 years of my life are kind of that whole cycle of moving somewhere, being the new dude, kind of falling into the same thing of like almost immediately, as soon as I would land at a new school or new neighborhood, the guys would like not like me because they didn't know me and they didn't grow up with me, and they'd all grown up together. And all like the girls would be intrigued because there was like a new dude on campus. And when I was like 7, 8, 9 years old, that wasn't such a big deal. But as I got older, that became a bigger deal. And I'll get more into that. But so I was about 8 or 9, and my parents like finally divorced. My mom finally was just like, can't live like this anymore. We're done. And my father, gave her plenty of reasons, aside from the abuse. I mean, he would also cheat on my mom all the time. He would, and it was kind of this deal of like, he was a different man behind closed doors. because we always lived on base, and on base he was liked, he was respected by, his subordinates as well as his superiors. But so but behind closed doors, he was like a totally different guy. And so he like got away with a lot. He would take my sister and I to like the bars on base with him. And my father was a big pool player, and we'd sit at the bar stool drinking, soda or water or whatever, and he would go shoot pool and like mess around with these other women in front of us, and then walk up to my little sister and I and say, "Shh, don't tell mom." And so it's just kind of a snapshot into what our life was kind of like, and what it was like living with my father. So by the time my parents finally split and we moved away for good, for me, the game was pretty much already over. I was already a very hurt, angry, resentful, lost, confused little boy. Basically just add drugs and alcohol. Like the game was already long over for me. I hated everything. I hated everybody. I hated myself because I believed all the things that my father was telling me. I hated my father for obvious reasons. I hated my mom because she would leave and then we would go back. And in a kind of a weird, twisted way, I hated her because she took us away for good, because he was still my father, my dad. And I hated my little sister because she was everything in my father's eyes that I could never be. And I blamed her. Every time I would look at her, it would be a reminder that you're the reason why. You're the reason why he doesn't love me. If you weren't here, then he would love me, because she was always his like angel, and she could never do anything wrong. And I really hated God, and I really resented God. I was raised Christian by my mom ever since we were little, and my mom would tell me things like to pray. She would say, pray like God sees us, or Jesus sees us. It's going to be okay. Or she would tell me these things, and I would pray. And I remember praying in my bed and praying things to him, like, and not knowing what I was doing or saying or even believing what I was saying, but I would just pray things like, don't let him come in my room tonight, or let him pass out in the living room, or whatever. And night after night, I would see the light come on in the hallway, and I had a pretty good idea of where he was headed. And I would get completely under the covers, and I like convinced myself that if I could fit my whole body, my whole tiny little 6-7-year-old body under the covers, that it would work as like a force field, and my father wouldn't see me or know that I was there. Obviously that wasn't true. So my conception of God was like, if it's F me, then it's F you, and you clearly don't care, because according to my mom, you're so big and bad that you could squash my father like a bug if you wanted to, yet you do nothing. And so I was just a really sick, sad little boy. I had a lot of stuff going on. And when we left my father and we moved to Houston, and I remember this like it happened yesterday. It's one of the very few like clear memories I have. I remember landing at the airport. And this was, of course, the time when like your family could come right up to the gate, like wait for you to get off the plane. And we got off the plane, and we were greeted by one of my mom's sisters and her husband. And her husband, my uncle, who plays a huge role in my life and in my recovery, especially when I was getting sober. But he gave me a Astros t-shirt and a Ninja Turtle skateboard. And I remember asking my mom if she thought they'd let me take the skateboard back on the plane. And I remember my mom got on her knees so we could be like pretty much eye to eye in the airport. And she was crying, and she said, "We're home. We're not leaving." And I remember her saying that, but it didn't register. I had no concept or understanding of what that meant, because we always left. So I just figured that it was still going to be the same. and for the most part, my mom was right. I mean, we moved all over Houston and the Katy area growing up, but we pretty much, other than one big geographical cure on my mom's part to move us to Colorado for my 8th grade year when I was 13 to try and get Joey away from like the bad kids and the drugs. That was it. And most of the time we stayed in Houston, and I think we were in Colorado for about 8 months. And her little experiment didn't work. I did a lot of hallucinogens in Colorado. But now we're in Houston, and it's my mom, my sister, and I, and my mom, like, she did the best that she could, but she was raising us on her own. She had support from family, but she's pretty much on her own. So most of the time, my mom would work like 2 or 3 jobs just to even kind of keep food on the table. And I kind of quickly fell into this role of, in a lot of ways, like being my sister's father. At this point, I'm like 8 or 9. She's like 5 or 6. She's like 3 years younger than me. And there's a few different significant things that happened in my life when we moved to Houston. One was that I actually made a friend when we moved to Houston. I met this kid. He was this really cool, incredible kid. And I kind of let my walls down a little bit, and I let myself like get to know him and try to make a friend or be a friend. And I knew him for about 6 weeks, and then he died in a house fire. And I remember that. And I remember that my mom wouldn't let me go to the funeral because she thought it would be too hard on me. But I just remember that, like, when that happened, it was like I went this way and God went that way. I was like, like I'm done. I gave it another shot. I tried, and I tried to connect and make a friend, and my understanding or conception was that, like, that you took him from me. So I was like, I'm done. And the other couple of things that were significant when I got to Houston that were really good for me was my uncle immediately got me involved in sports, which has been a huge sanctuary for me throughout my life, and in a lot of ways still is. And also pretty shortly after that, got me involved in martial arts. Not to really learn how to fight, but more to learn how to defend myself, because I had a lot of bullies growing up. One, because I was pretty easy target. I was always the new kid. I went to so many different new schools, and I was always pretty much, a skinny, big mouthed, kind of attention seeking little white kid. And so I didn't make it necessarily easy on myself, or to not be bullied. So I had a lot of bullies, and my uncle recognized that. So got me involved in learning how to defend myself so that I could. And the other thing is, like, now I'm taking care of my sister, and I'm like in charge of her, and I pretty quickly kind of fall into that role. And my mom comes home, for maybe an hour or 2 every night, and the 3 of us will like sit in front of the TV and eat a quick like TV dinner, and then she'd be out the door, and she'd be like, all right, I gotta go, Joey, like, take care of your sister. If you're up when I get home, I'll see you, or I'll see you in the morning. And so I had to make sure that, like, my sister got taken care of, bathed, in the bed, all that kind of stuff. And it was just kind of the norm for us. I didn't understand or realize that there was anything that was odd or peculiar about that. And that's how it went for years. We again, like, my mom did the best that she could, but it was hard. It was hard on her. It was hard on us. It wasn't uncommon for us to get evicted from places that we lived at. We lived in a car for a little while, the 3 of us. We stayed with family here or there where my mom could arrange it. It wasn't uncommon for the lights to go out and have to live by candlelight, or not have water or hot water. It's just like, this was just kind of the norm. for us, and it contributed a lot to all of the moves that we made, which just kind of perpetuated this cycle of me like not understanding, being the new kid again, fearful of making friends or not wanting to make friends or have anything really to do with anybody. So I was kind of outcast a little bit. Like I kind of did that to myself because of the pain of having to leave. And it went on like that until I was probably I was 11, and we had just moved to a different place in the Houston area, and I'm in this new school, and first day I'm there, I'm getting like approached by these kids, these bullies. You know, kids can be cruel. And again, I'm like an easy target. So these guys, they like seek me out and they start like, you know, making fun of me, bullying me a little bit. And there was another kid in my class who was like, he was just like a carbon copy of me. He lived in the same apartment complex I did. He was being raised by a single mom. He had a little sister named Alyssa. My little sister's name is Alicia. He had a deadbeat alcoholic father who didn't want anything to do with him. Like this kid was me, and he was being bullied by these same kids. And it was like looking in a mirror. And so I connected with this kid. And that's how I got introduced to like real self-destructive behavior, like sneaking out, breaking the law, really acting out in school, drugs and alcohol. Because this kid, his name is Sean, he knew people or older kids in the neighborhood, and he introduced me to some of them. And I learned real early on that all I was really looking for was to change the way that I felt. That's really what I wanted. I could not stand to live in my own skin. I couldn't stand to be Joe. It wasn't okay to be Joe. I had to do something to change the way that I felt. And that took a lot of different forms. That could have been drugs or alcohol or video games or breaking the law or being the class clown or fighting or girls or, you know, whatever. If it would change the way that I feel, then I was all for it. Cause I didn't know how to articulate this at the time, but I just had such low self-esteem, that I just hated myself. So I met some of the other kids in the neighborhood through this kid, Sean. And I remember going over to one of their apartments one day, and they were all like, they were smoking weed out of like a Coke can. And I just remember sitting there, like being really anxious, not knowing any of these people, really confused by what they were doing, because I'd never seen anything like that up to that point. And I was sitting next to this girl that was a couple years older than me, and we were sitting, it was her apartment, and we were sitting on her bed, and we were sitting with our like backs against the wall, and she was wearing these socks that came up to her knees that said "kiss me." And I just looked down and I read her socks and I said, "Kiss me." And this like older, really pretty girl just like leaned over and kissed me. And, you know, other than a peck, like my girl style, when I was like 8 years old, that was like my like first kind of any kind of like interaction with a girl or a kiss or anything like that. So, I didn't get high that day or use that day, but that was really significant because that was the day that I decided like, this is where I want to be. Like I loved the attention that I was getting. And all these kids that Sean and I were hanging out with were older, you know, so they kind of treated us like they're little brothers. You know, it was almost kind of a game to see how like messed up they could get us, or, you know, they would just give us stuff to do and I would do it. They would just be like, hey, you know, here's some pills, take them. And I would, not having really any clue what I was doing, but just knowing that this was changing the way that I felt. And I felt like I belonged somewhere and that I was like accepted, and I got a lot of attention And so the more that I started hanging out with Sean and this other group of kids and getting high, and this is the days before like cell phones, so my mom couldn't just call me up to find out where I was. The more I started engaging in that kind of stuff and that behavior, the less and less I cared about taking care of my sister or helping my mom out, or whatever. And I started to like withdraw from being at home and started to like not do some of my responsibilities. Like I was responsible for like the laundry for everybody in the house, and I was still taking care of my sister and had to wait till she got out of school. And at this point, she's like 8. We're going to the same elementary. I'm in 5th grade. I had to wait for her to get out of school to make sure she got home safe, and on and on. And I just kind of quit doing all of that. I didn't want to do that, any of that anymore. I didn't care. I was tired of being her father. And I didn't care about any of that. I didn't care about school. All I wanted to do was just engage as much as I possibly could in this world and changing the way that I felt and using and drinking and all of that kind of stuff. And pretty quickly, and I'm really blessed and fortunate that like my like using career was like pretty fast and furious, and it got pretty bad pretty quick. And I was like able to get out and get sober as young as I did. But so the more that I withdrew at home, of course, the more my mom started to notice and would intervene, or she would try to intervene. My mom's never really been much of a disciplinarian, but she would try to intervene and stop me from like leaving the house or going out, or I'd go like put a couple loads of laundry in, and then I'd go over to this girl's house and get really messed up and totally forget about the laundry and stumble home like in the middle of the morning. And my mom is just like, what the hell? Like what is going on with my son? And so, she did what any mom would try to do, to try to intervene and try to see what was going on. And really that was like in the form of, punishment, basically. And so when she would try to punish me or enforce rules, I've pretty much been bigger than my mom since I was about 10 or 11. And I would get angry, and I wouldn't want to do whatever it was that she was telling me to do, or I didn't want to stay home. I wanted to go out. I wanted to just do what I wanted to do. And so when my mom started intervening and turning up the heat and trying to stop my behavior, then I became the one who was the abuser. And because that's the behavior, and this isn't an excuse, I'm responsible for my own behavior, but that's the behavior that was modeled for me growing up. And so what I witnessed was when my father got angry or something didn't go the way that he wanted to, well, he usually solved it with violence or with his fists or some form of that. And so that's what I started. That's what I started doing. I started, whenever my mom would try and stop me from leaving, I would just like push her, or I would hit her to just get her off of me so I could leave, or I could run away. I was just so angry and hurt and lost, and didn't have a clue what I was doing. I was just a really sick, sad little boy. So when my anger would start coming out towards my mom, then it would really come out towards my little sister, because like I said, I blamed her. She was the reason. If you weren't here, then he would still love me. Even after my parents got divorced, my father and my sister have the same birthday. So, my birthday would come around and, nothing. Her birthday would come around and she would get, gifts and money, and he would take her on trips. And, when Christmas came around, there would be like presents under the tree that would say like, "To Joey, love, Dad," but in my mom's writing. You know what I mean? And so all of that just built up, and and I just, every time I would see my sister, and I was just tired of being her father. I didn't want to take care of her anymore or have to do any of that. So I also became really physically and emotionally abusive to her. And again, things kind of moved pretty quickly. And pretty quickly after that, my mom started like making some moves as far as like physical moves again to get me away from the kids that I was hanging out with, but also starting to look at like psychiatric facilities and things like that. And I've been in counseling on in some fashion, rather as psychiatrist or psychologist or counselor or whatever, since I was probably about 5 or 6 years old. So it's kind of amazing I became one. So I was no stranger to any of that, but she really started to kind of turn up the heat. You know, in fact, the first time that I went to any kind of like treatment or got any kind of psychiatric help, my mom actually, she like, there used to be an amusement park in Houston called Astro World. Some of you guys are familiar with it. And my mom told me that I was going to Astro World, and I ended up in residential treatment. So she started making moves, and that's a story in and of itself, and a pretty good one, but I won't tell it now. But my point is that like this started the trend of me like running away, being out a lot, being abusive in various ways to my mom and my sister. My mom sending me to several different places, several different psychiatric facilities, and really, when I would go into those places, I would really get exactly what I was looking for. I would get attention. I would get so much attention in those places that I just ate it up, but nothing was really like changing on the inside. I just learned how to kind of play the game a little bit and do whatever it was that I needed to do. So once I got tired of being there, I could convince them to let me go. And I had like my whole life, I always had, whether it was counselors or teachers or principals or even police or judges, I always had people that, through the best of intentions, I'm sure, but I always had people that enabled me. And that's like a kind of a buzzword in recovery. But I would have people that would like throw a pillow under my ass to cushion my fall, or would take pity on me, treat me like a charity case, or would tell me things like, would be familiar with like my story or my history or whatever, and would be like, well, it's been so hard on you and things have been so rough that, let me just kind of give you this slap on the wrist. So I got really used to not really having any like real accountability for my behavior, and it kind of gave me a license to kind of do whatever it is that like I really wanted. And my mom was always really good at this. And this is not accountability. This is never accountability. This is what we as codependents do to try to get the people that we're barking at or we're talking at to agree with us or get on board with us, or something that I do to make myself feel better. But people don't really change or experience consequences because of this. Like we get used to this. It's easy to kind of sit through that. And that was like what my mom did. And, so for the next 3-ish or so years, until the summer of 97, when I was 14, we had just gotten back from Colorado. We were there for about 8 months, and I was my behavior was just as bad there as it was anywhere. And so, and we were there alone, and my mom's whole family was here in Texas, in Houston. So we moved back, and so again, same old thing. Like we moved back in like April or May of 97. So it's the very end of my 8th grade year. The first day that I'm in school, I like piss off one of the like cool dudes in school. And so I've got everybody on my ass again. And so it's like, it's just rinse and repeat. And I meet some kids in the neighborhood that, you know, don't have the best behavior and blah, blah, blah. So like same old story. So, but it all came to head one night and real early in the summer of 97. And a lot of this is kind of a blur too, but real early in the summer of 97, when, I told my mom I was going place A, and she was okay with me going place A. But of course, I really wasn't going there. I was going to place B to hang out with people all night and get high and get drunk and hoping that my mom would be like none the wiser. And so that was my plan. And I was supposed to be at this kid's house all night, and we had like the run of the house, and there was only like 4 of us there. But his dad ended up coming home in like the middle of the night and threw us all out. And then it was probably like 2, 3, 4 in the morning, something like that. I don't know. But so I'm 14, and luckily this kid only lived like a few blocks away from where we were living. And there was another kid there that drove that I didn't know. I met him that night and I never saw him again. But he threw my and he had a truck. So he threw my bike in the bed of his truck, and he took me home. And I got home and I threw my bike in the bushes, and I didn't have a key or anything like that. And I started like pounding on the door. My mom was asleep on the couch. And by this time she had kind of figured out that I wasn't where I was supposed to be. And my mom comes to the door, and I start yelling at her. I'm like, I'm really messed up. I'm very intoxicated. And I started yelling at her to like open the door and let me in. And she says, no. She says, I'm done. That night she told me that she'll always love me because I'm her son, but she hate who I had become. And that she had to give me a way to keep me. And I remember being so angry that I tried to pick up my bike and throw it through the window, but I couldn't do it. I was too messed up. I couldn't lift my bike. And at the time, we lived like literally right across the street from the neighborhood pool. And so I somehow got myself over the fence and passed out on the lawn chairs at the pool. And when I came to the next day, I tried to go back home. When I went, nobody was there. But and so basically my mom, she kicked me out. I was 14, and she was just like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And it was by far like the greatest gift that she ever gave me, by far. I probably would not be sitting here right now, healthy, sane, and sober, if she hadn't done that. Because it rapidly, well, it brought up my bottom, but it also rapidly like sped it up. Because that summer of 97 is kind of a big blur in my head, but there was nowhere that I could go. It was like my mom was really clear that the only way that I was going to be able to come back was if I was wanting to get some help or ready to really get some help, that her and Alicia were not going to live like that anymore. And the rest of my family was pretty clear on that, on that too. And I wanted to do what I wanted to do. And it was the summer of 97. So I could crash with friends kind of here or there, just try to like make it through. But I wasn't a great person. I was the kind of friend that would like steal your stuff and help you look for it. That's kind of how I like treated the people in my life. And so when I would go stay with friends, it wouldn't last very long before their parents were like, man, we can't have you here. Like, you got to go. Like, well, we can call somebody, but, and I would just run and I would leave. And so when I burned all those bridges and I ran out of places to be, then I was basically, I lived on the streets. I wander around and, didn't really like sleep at, parks, or again, it was the summer, so luckily it wasn't cold. That probably would have sped up my bottom even more. But yeah, I'd sleep at apartment pools on the lawn chairs, and I was just basically living the addict life. Just, it wasn't even necessarily about being high anymore. I was just shooting for being numb. I just couldn't stand my life, and it felt like everything that my father had told me was true. It felt like that his words were prophetic, that everybody was better off without me, that I was no good, I wasn't gonna amount to anything. And I really wanted to die. And I'd been suicidal for years and years, and had like some half-assed attempts, but only attempts that I knew would like give me attention. You know, I like ran out in front of a car knowing that it would stop, and it did. And I like broke my leg, or I jumped off of like a second story building knowing that wasn't, and I broke my leg. It's like all of the, I didn't really want, I had all these cries for help. I didn't really want to die. I was just so lost. And then in September of 97, my sobriety date is September 15th of 97. My uncle, the same uncle that gave me the Ninja Turtle skateboard and the Astros t-shirt, came and found me. And I didn't know this at the time, but he'd been in recovery for about 10 years. And he brought me to my first meeting. And then after my first real 12-step meeting. And then after the meeting, he basically gave me an ultimatum that I could like come live with him and his family, and we'd figure things out, and he'd help me get sober, or he said, I'll drop you off where I found you. And I just kind of jumped at the offer. I didn't have any real honest intention of like being sober or even really knowing what that meant. But the idea of being able to sleep in a bed, eating some real food, again, because he had fed me when he picked me up, taking a real shower, like those are like, I jumped at those things. I was just so sick and done with what I was doing and how I was living. I just needed a lifeline. And that's what he gave me. And I moved in with him and his family, and he got me in school because it was September and my freshman year had started, which I shouldn't have been a freshman at all. I shouldn't have even passed 8th grade. It was another one of those like counselors taking pity on me and telling me like, you're going to figure this out in high school. I'm going to go ahead, even though you failed everything, you're going to figure it out. I'm going to go ahead and push you forward. Again, with the best of intentions. But so I moved in with him. I got enrolled in school, and I actually tried to run away and get high about 2 or 3 days after that. And he caught me because he played the game way better than I ever had. And he knew what I was up to, and he caught me. And that's how I got introduced to, back then we used to call them like young people sobriety programs. Now they're called alternative peer groups, which is like what Cornerstone is. And back then there was one, like Cornerstone wasn't around yet, but there was one called Lifeway. And I went to one of their meetings, and again, I just got like, I was kind of like freaked out a little bit, but I like got all this attention. I had all these people coming up to me and giving me hugs and telling me that they loved me. And I had people like saying, welcome home. We're so glad you're here. And I'm like, I don't even know you people. Like, what is going on? But I had like, there's probably like 50 or 60 teenagers in the group back then. And I was like I was getting all the attention because I was like I was the newcomer. I was the new guy. And so once again, I fell into the changing the way that I felt through getting the attention. And I know it's so hard to cram this into an hour, and I know that I'm running out of time, so I'll try and speed this up. But so I got into the program. I got into that Lifeway program. I ended up getting into an outpatient program through Lifeway. I lived with my aunt and uncle for about 8 months, and till I could go home. I I had to do this outpatient program. I had to get into some anger management. I had to meet specifically with a therapist that specialized in trauma, because I had a lot of trauma. I had a lot of daddy issues that needed to be worked through. And so I started doing all that stuff, and I started like learning like a 14-year-old's like understanding of like what self-esteem is. And I started to get some attention in some other ways other than like getting high or breaking the law or breaking into people's houses, or, or any of the self-destructive behavior. And the way that the peer group works is that it just takes peer pressure, as I always knew it, and kind of flips it on its head. So now it's like the cool kids or my peers are encouraging me to like be honest and get real and treat people respectfully, and so on and so forth. And I had no idea how to do any of that. Like honesty has never been something that comes natural for me. It still doesn't. I have to fight to be honest. Like my knee-jerk reaction is to lie, to placate, to screw people over, to do whatever I got to do to get the microscope or the bright light off of me. Like it's not my natural reaction to be real or sober or authentic. And that's what these kids were, and that's what they taught me to do. And I pretty quickly kind of caught like what I called the recovery bug. And I just fell in love with all of it. I fell in love with the joy, the fellowship, the like good, healthy, real attention that I was getting. I started working some steps a little bit. There's a 12-step program. I started working the steps, and things just kind of started to shift and started to change. And I wanted to do better, and I wanted to be better. And I don't know if I think I said this, but I lived with my aunt and uncle for about 8 months. And then I moved back home with my mom and my sister. And I pretty much just had one rule. It was like, if I got angry, then I was out, period. And like some of the dudes in the group or my sponsor would come pick me up, and I'd stay with them for 2 or 3 days or a week or something like that. And then I'd move back home, and we try again. Because ultimately the goal is to be able to be at home and work your program and practice your principles imperfectly, but consistently at home with your family. So the first like 2 years or so of my recovery, I got kicked out probably at least once or twice a month for a few days or a week or something like that. Like it was a long road for like me, my mom, my sister, when it came to like recovery and putting things back together. And then things just like started happening. I started getting some self-esteem, some ambition. When I was doing the outpatient program, I wasn't in school at all, because my mom was like, we're going to focus all efforts on getting you well and getting you better. And school's not going anywhere, but you can't go to school if you're dead. So we're gonna do this. And somewhere in that process, I really wanted to go back to school and finish school. So when I graduated that outpatient program, I did like 2 years of my life. I did like my junior and senior year all in 1 year, so that I could graduate on time. Because I was about a year and a half or so, 2 years behind. And it was important to me, not anybody else. My mom wouldn't have cared if I graduated 6 months later or a year later or whatever, but it was important to me. I wanted to do it. I wanted to graduate on time. And I did that. I graduated in high school when I was supposed to in 2001. Back then, Texas Tech was the only college, university in the country that had a collegiate recovery community. And so I went there to go to school on a sober scholarship. And that totally saved my ass, because I don't think I would have been able to make it through college or through school sober if I didn't have that. Because once again, I had a positive, healthy, sober peer group, and there's never going to be anything more important than me having healthy friends, regardless of how old I am. There's never going to be anything more important than me having healthy peers or healthy friends, especially when I'm a teenager or a young adult. And as soon as I got on campus, I just had this crazy, great group of dudes that were around my age. Most of them were a little older, but that I took classes with and I lived with, and we would go to meetings together, and they introduced me to people, around town, and I got soaked into the recovery world, and it was awesome. It was a real lifesaver for me. And when I was a freshman, is when 9/11 happened, and I remember when I was 18, and I remember when that happened, that it was kind of like my whole world came crashing down. It's like I didn't think that the rest of the world would really think twice before messing with us, and watching all of that happen live that morning. um uh I just got really convicted, and I felt like it was time for me to get off my ass and start earning some of the freedom that I enjoy. And so I enlisted in the Marine Corps, partly to show up my father, because he was in the Air Force. So I really liked the idea of being able to tell him, like, you're a fly boy, I'm a Marine. And I have. But other than my father, everybody else in my family was either a Navy SEAL or a Marine. And I knew that, and I was angry. I wanted to go fight. And I knew that I would be able to get into the fight quickest and have really some of the best training if I went in the Marines. And so I did. And I spent like the next 3 years or so all over the world. Spent about a year in Iraq in 04 and 05. I was there. I was a machine gunner in the Marine Corps, and my company played a pretty big part, a supportive role in the Battle of Fallujah in November of 04. It's called Operation Phantom Fury, but I think back home they called it the Battle of Fallujah. And I had like some of the absolute best and some of the absolute like worst times of my life when I was in Iraq, and lost a lot of really great people that I'll never forget, and did what I set out to do, and I came back home I got home in March of 05. I went back to school, and I graduated in May of 08, and God made it so to where I ended up back in Houston. And in like the spring of, I moved back down here in the spring of 2009, and I connected with Cornerstone again, because I graduated from the Cornerstone program as a teenager, and I connected with them again in like May of 2011, and been working with Cornerstone. I'm a co-owner of Cornerstone, but I started off as an intern and working for the program in May of 2011. And it's such an incredible experience for me to like just come like full circle to where like it all began for me, and where my recovery began. And like Aubrey read in part of my bio, like I remember being 14 and sitting in outpatient and looking at my counselor and being like, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna be him someday. Like, and other than my like little stint in the Marine Corps, I was in for about 8 years, but other than my time in the Marine Corps, I never wavered from that. I always wanted to do what it is that I'm doing now. And so I'm like, I've gotten to literally live my dream. Like I'm literally living my dream. Like, this is really where I belong. This is what I believe I was born to do. One of the promises in the program, my favorite promise actually, is that we won't regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. And I found like my calling. You know, I believe that I've been called to do what I do the same way as like a preacher or a priest is called into the ministry. And that the reason why I went through all that stuff and I made it through and I endured my childhood and my own addiction and was so I could be strategically placed to hopefully just be an empty vessel for God or higher power to use to help others, because I have such experience, and there isn't much that I really haven't experienced myself, or I don't have some kind of strength or hope around. And I know I need to wrap it up here quickly, and I apologize. I really want to be respectful of y'all's time, but kind of there's a lot that I'm kind of missing. But fast forward, I celebrated 24 years sober this past September, which is incredible. It's got little to do with me and a whole lot to do with God and a lot of good people that he put in my life. And I'm still very active in my own recovery. I try really hard to practice what I preach. I go to meetings. I have a sponsor that I work with regularly. I have sponsees. I take other people through the steps. I work my steps. I work the 12 steps. I try to practice the spiritual principles of honesty, humility, love, service, acceptance, willingness, like all of that stuff, imperfectly but consistently in my life. And it just keeps getting better and better. Like life and my recovery, it really has just gotten better and better. My mom and my sister and I were good today. We've been good for a long time now. And I'm sure there's probably some questions about that I'm more than open to answer. My life is pretty much an open book. But my sister got married in 2010, and I got to walk her down the aisle. And that was like the proudest moment of my life. I was literally crying more that day than she was. And my older brother got married in 2005, and I got to be his best man, which was also like really, really cool. And that was actually the last time that I saw my father. I've seen him once since I was 8. And that was in May of 2005 at my brother's wedding. And that's okay. I don't have any ill will towards the man. I got a lot of love for him. I don't really think that you should pity people, but I kind of pity him a little bit. I am him in a lot of ways. I am my father, but there's no resentment. There's no, there'll always be that like little boy inside of me that longs for his father. Like that's never going to change. But like, there's no resentment or anger. There's just a lot of love, some sadness there, but I'm kind of rambling now, but yeah, I can't think of, I'm kind of tongue tied. I can't think of how to end it, but I think I've gone over. Yeah. So I'll end it there. And thank you guys again for showing up tonight, for asking me to do this. Aubrey, this is always such just a rare experience and an honor and a privilege when I get to do this and
utilize Joe. He's a wealth of information. So if anybody has any questions, please raise your hand or unmute. I think Sean, you have your hand up, so you can go first.
My only question was regarding your self-esteem. How did you take the words that your father implanted into you and change that so that your self-esteem was raised?
Oh, that's a really great question, Sean. I would say that through through the relationships that I've been able to build, especially when I was a teenager, and through getting some positive feedback, some positive peer pressure, learning to really love myself through the process of working the steps, really building my self-esteem. And there's no like one way to like build self-esteem. There's like a lot of different ways. There's no like magic wand when it comes to doing any of this, but things that were really powerful for me were like affirmations, doing affirmations, having them on the mirror. That was like one of the first assignments that my counselor gave me, was having affirmations on the mirror and doing them over and over and over again, because repetition strengthens and confirms. So I've got like this shitty committee in my head that I'm always going to have, that's all constantly feeding me that you're no good. You should just go dig ditches. You're not really helping people. Everybody's going to leave you in the end, blah, 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 telling me all of this crap. And so I've got to have something to combat that, to quiet those voices. And that is the building of self-esteem through starting things and finishing them. People that really suffer with substance abuse or self-destructive behaviors are kind of notorious for starting things and not finishing them. And that's like detrimental for character development and self-esteem. Through developing healthy habits of like working my steps, working with a sponsor, practicing being real, being honest over and over again, experiencing real healing within my family, like all of those things have built and continue to build my self-esteem. So now most days when I hear that voice or that shitty committee, it's really easy. Well, I don't know about easy, but it's easier a lot of days for me to just kind of tell it to shut up, or just be like, no, like I know that that's not true. And I know that that's not true because I've put in so much work that shows me that that's not true. And the relationships that I have, and the feedback that I get, and the real like the long-term motivators for recovery and healing, like joy, fellowship, connection, being a part of something that really matters, having like what Janelle and Reagan have right now. Like that's really what it's all about.
Great.
That is awesome.
It's a two-part question though. So first question is to Joe. Did you decide not to have a relationship with your father, or did your father make that decision for you?
A little bit of both. There's been some half-ass attempts since I've been a young adult or an adult for him to try to re-engage with me in some ways, but it's never really left to anything or gone anywhere. And I've been in a place to where like I'm available for it and I'm open to it, but I'm not gonna just lead with the chin or like put myself out there to be hurt, because nobody on the planet can hurt me like this man can. And he's just really sick and really unhealthy, and still points the finger a whole lot. I hear about him through my brother. My brother and him have a relationship, and he's really the only kid that my father has any kind of relationship with. But there's never been a real like honest attempt on his part. When I saw him at the wedding, he was like, I'm going to call you. We got so much that we need to talk about and hash out. And I was like, okay, cool, dude. And never heard from him. A couple of years after that, his father died, and he called me again and was like, I just had to bury my father, and I don't ever want you to have to go through that the way that we are now. And he's like, I don't care if I call you every day and you never answer the phone. I'm going to call you every day. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, we'll see. And he called like one or two times, and that was it. So I'm not opposed to it, but I don't need it today. You know what I mean? Like along the way, God put the men in my life to be a dad or a father to me that I needed when I needed them. He still does that. And, you know, and I'm a man today. I'm a grown man, more one than he's ever been. And the only things that I've really got left to learn is how to be a good dad and a good husband. And he can't really teach me, you know, squat about either one of those.
Right. That's awesome. It's the perfect answer, I think. I'm also a counselor, so I hear a lot of things. People have a lot of opinions about relationships with family members.
Sure.
And so what do you say to people who express that you should be the bigger person and maintain a relationship with a toxic family member because they're family? What do you say to people about that?
I say that's crap. You know, I say like, you have a choice. I don't have to be in any relationship that I don't want to be in. And it's not about like a right or wrong or anything like that. It's about a boundaries thing, especially if it's toxic. Nobody has a right to treat me poorly or unfairly. I don't care if that's my mom, my sister, you know, my girlfriend, my dog, like whatever. Nobody has a right to treat me poorly or unfairly. And I teach people how to treat me. So if I accept that, well, then the feedback that I'm giving them is that this is okay with me. You can continue to do this, which is not really loving them. The way that, well, I don't want to say we, but the way that I really like to love people, the most loving thing you can do for anybody is really hold them responsible and accountable for their behavior, the way they treat people, and the words of their voice. And that doesn't just extend to our kids. Like that extends to everybody in my life. I will say though, by extension of that I'm 100% responsible for my relationships. So if I choose to be in a relationship with somebody that is maybe not the healthiest or is sick or is toxic, like it's okay for me to make that choice, but that means that I'm choosing to be responsible. So I can't play the victim, or I can't be the martyr, or point the finger, or blame, or any of that. I can't get upset at you for behaving how I know you're going to behave. I'm choosing to engage in this, and it's okay for you to be wherever it is that you are. And, you know, I read years ago in an Al-Anon reading that like, and this isn't ideal, but that like what real love is, and I love this, and I don't think I'm very good at it, but what real love is accepting somebody for being exactly who and where they are at this moment without any need, want, or desire to change them. And that's hard. Because I want to change people. I'm super controlling. I want to change people. The last thing I'll say about that is that like in recovery, when we start to get better, or I start to get better, well, usually the people in my life that are sick get angry because things start changing and things start shifting in the relationship. And what at one time might have been okay is no longer okay.
Thank you.
Great questions, you know, great questions.
Absolutely. Does anybody else have another question?
When your mom like said she was gonna take you to Astroworld and took you to the rehab instead,
Yeah.
did you what's the word?
Rage?
No, what is it called? Like holding a grudge, basically. Did you resent her,
Yes.
or did you forgive her?
Well, I mean, I forgave her eventually, you know, I mean, through working the steps and, you know, and getting to a place of like doing inventories and being able to really look at myself honestly. But I mean, I definitely resented her for that. And I already resented her.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Sean again.
Hey, Sean.
I'm just wondering about your sister. What kind of effect did it have, like your actions have on her, like this whole, your whole story? What kind of effect did it have on her? That
Massive.
you know of?
Massive effect and impact as far as like her safety, her trust issues. Some of that was kind of already there, because even though she didn't get the brunt of the abuse with my father, she was like witness and privy to a lot of it. And it took a lot of years for her and I to be able to really like come back together, to where like today she's she's for sure one of my best friends, if not my best friend. But fortunately, when I got sober, I was 14 and she was 11. So we were still like pretty, and we've always been pretty resilient. So, I have a living amends to my mom and my sister and the people in my life to continue to take care of myself, so that I won't ever, knock on wood, return to who I was before. Because that monster is still in there, and he always will be. I've got no cure. I think about like my disease as like a dragon sleeping inside of me, and I keep him in his slumber by like working my program and connecting with God and engaging with my sponsor and my steps and all of that kind of stuff. But if I stop doing those things, then I'm either growing or I'm dying in this deal. There's not a third direction. And if I stop doing those things long enough, and I pick up or I drink or I get high or, something like that, which I'm not immune to doing, then I know that I like that dragon will be awoken. And I'm terrified of what happens after that.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Great question.
Hi. So marijuana was legalized here. Oh, I'm getting choked up. Sorry.
It's okay.
And I'm just looking for resources like your beautiful resources in Houston. And I've read, is it Michelle, your story of how you were in, is it Colorado, and moved to Houston for those resources. I just want to say how beautiful it is that you have that there, and you had your experience with coming home and knowing that your recovery family was there. And I just pray for that for my son who's struggling, and I'm trying to be that mom, like your mom, saying, this is what we're going to do. I have to be strong. I have to kind of go, forgive the term, ghetto, to fight where he's at, and he hates my guts. But when I give in, I feel like I lose, because he runs back to the friends that are in it. And my husband and I are trying to work together, but sometimes we're opposite. But I guess without saying too much, and just sorry, I'm not trying to have a platform here. I just want to say I'm so happy for you. And I'm so happy that you have the programs, and this Every Brain Matters has helped me learn a lot. So thanks, guys.
Absolutely. Real quick, how old's your son?
He's 18.
Okay.
And when he was 17, I kind of had an idea stuff was going on, but I just was kind of devastated and I felt numb and just like I couldn't move. And everybody kept telling me, do something now while he's under 18, do something now while he's under 18. Because when he's 18, he's an adult and he can walk away from the programs, so I don't know what the answer is. I said, you have to get a full-time job, because I had to have him out of the house because he was a raving lunatic. And some people are like, well, that was a bad idea because he needs help. It's just throwing him to work. We'll see how he does. But, you just listen to everybody talking to you, and you're just like, okay, what is the right path? What should I do?
Totally. Well, I will tell you that it's not too late for sure. I don't believe that anything is hopeless. I think that there's always hope. Aubrey, if you would put my info in the chat, and Andrea, if you want, it'll have my email, my cell phone number. Feel free, no pressure, but feel free to to reach out offline if there's anything or any way that I can help. I've worked with probably thousands of families by this point in your same situation, and there's still a lot that you can do. First and foremost, for yourself, which will positively impact your son.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. So glad that you were able to make it here tonight.
Me too. Thanks for being here.
TT, do you have a question?
Yes. Hey,
So,
just a question. What did it take you for you to rid yourself of that like victim mindset, like that resentment against like everyone in your life and God?
that's a really good question, dude. I just got sick of it, man. Like when I got here and when I got sober, I was like the king of the victims and I was proud of it. It's so like sick now coming out of my mouth, but I was proud of it. I thought like I deserve to be a victim. Like I had a chip on my shoulder. It was like, I deserve to be a victim. Look at all this crap and how I grew up and my father and, and the living, blah, blah, all of that crap. Like it was like a point of pride for me. And when I had some real people in my life who would tell me things like in a loving and tolerant way would be like, shut up, dude. Like you're not a victim. Victims don't have choices. You've got a choice today. Once upon a time, you were a victim, but you're not a victim today. Today, you're a volunteer. If you keep like, signing up for this misery and luckily I had people in my life that loved me enough to talk to me like that. And I just got sick of it. Like the victim thing just got so uncomfortable for me that I was ready and willing to do the work to drop it and to move past it and to not be a victim.
Thank you.
That's a really good question, dude.
Joe, you talked about like in the beginning of your testimony, you talked about like not talking but holding boundaries. Like a lot of things people say to me, well, there's not like families say to me, well, there's nothing I can do because my son or daughter is not willing to get help. And they try to talk them into it. Can you talk a little bit about how the boundaries matter at that point? I mean, they matter all the time, but especially when they're not receptive to getting help.
Yeah, totally. Then there's a lot that you can do. And like one of the first things that you can do is you could start to get educated, attending groups like like the Mar-Anon groups or Al-Anon groups or like our climbers group, or being around people that get it, that have been where you have been and maybe or have been where you are and maybe a little further down the road, but they're just as close to the ditch. None of us escape this thing, but they can offer some strength, experience, and hope to where like they get it. That's like kind of how like recovery works. Like recovery or the 12 steps, Alcoholics Anonymous started with one alcoholic relating to another and sharing their strength, experience, and hope and leaning on each other and finding strength in that. And through that and through the education and learning things and picking up things, then you get to a place to where you can kind of figure out for yourself, well, what is okay with me and what is not? What am I willing to accept and what am I not? And you can start somewhere, start where you are, work with what you got, do what you can. It doesn't matter if the boundary is you're going to bed without Blue Bell ice cream. If that kid or loved one has not heard no in forever and you've been living with a terrorist, even just doing that sends a message. And the messaging and the tone is so important. So if I can start with my boundary is you are disrespectful to me or dishonest, so you're going to bed without ice cream. If I could start there and I can do that consistently, because the procedure only works if it's followed every time, well, then I can build. I can build off of that to holding some real strong, firm, loving, tough boundaries and drawing some lines in the sand and refusing to move them. But I gotta start somewhere, and it's okay for you to be wherever it is that you are. And knowing that you're not alone, that's huge. Like we're not intended, nor are we equipped to do this alone. It takes a village.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment or ask a question? It's your last chance for Joe. You have to come to the Wednesday meetings otherwise. Well, we will sign off. Joe, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Thanks for
Thank you,
having me.
Joe.